In the previous video, we saw how to register a user, and in this video, we're going to take a look at how to achieve login using GraphQL. So what I'm going to do is create yet another mutation for the user type, and we're going to have a login mutation that will of course require a string, and that's non-nullable, and a password which should also be a string. And what the login will return is an actual token. So remember, we are using JSON web tokens here, and because it returns a new type, we need to also create that type. So I'm going to type in type token, and this will have a field which will be a token that is non-nullable. Right, so we can save this file. And because we have created a new mutation, we need to go back to the user resolver and write the functionality for that as well. So what do we want to do when someone logs in? So we have a login, and we will have access to the parent. We will extract the username and the password, and then we'll pass in models, and then we will do something here. So what do we want to do here? Well, first of all, we want to make sure that the username that someone enters is in our database. Then we want to make sure that the password that they pass in is also valid. So we need to hash the password and compare that with the already hashed version of the password that's in the database. And we will need to generate a token as well. So that's quite a lot of things to do, so let's get going. So first of all, let's make sure we have a user, right? So we can do models.user.find1, and we can pass in a where statement, and we can pass in the actual extracted username. So this is going to essentially run a SQL statement that says select star from user where the username is equal to the username that we passed in as part of the mutation. But remember, models.user.create return the promise, so does find1, so we can't just do this assignment here. So we need await, and if you have await, we need to have this whole function to be an asynchronous function. Now, the one thing we can do and say, if it's not a user, then we're just going to throw a new error and say user not found. And now we need to validate the password. So the question is, how can we validate the password? Well, we need to write some additional functionality at the model level. And we need to go back to the user model here. And remember, we talked about the instance methods, and we added one instance method here. So now we need to add another one using the prototypal inheritance, and that is going to be called validate, or we could call that validate password even, which will be a function that accepts the password. And what it will do is going to return bcrypt, and bcrypt has a compare method that allows us to compare the data, that's the password, and the encrypted version of the password. So the password is going to be that we send in, so that's going to be the string version of the password that we send in as part of the mutation, and this .password is going to be again the password for a given user. And because we are using an instance method, remember, this is going to go through the dataset row by row. And just like how we did this above, we need to make this an async await, right? So we need to make sure that we wait for bcrypt to run the comparison before we progress. So let's save this. Now we can go back to the user resolver, and in the user resolver we can now do something like let's just call it valid password, and we can now await the user.validate password method, where we're going to send in the password that we extracted from the arguments. And we can call await here because we are still in the scope of this async function. And we can do this then. If not valid password, so if the password is not valid, we're just going to throw a new error that will say passwords is incorrect. Okay, so the last step here should be that if the user is found and if the password is correct, then remember the login function here, according to our mutation, should return a token. So we should somehow return a token. So I'm going to return an object that we have a token property, but we need to actually create that token. So remember that in the very first video in this section, we installed a package called JSON Web Token. So we're going to require that now, and we're going to create a helper function in here. So let's call that create token. That will have a user, a secret, and an expires in argument. And let's then extract the ID, the name, and the username from the user that we pass in. So that's going to be the entire user object. And let's return this function. So JWT or jot.sign is the function from the JSON Web Token package that allows us to actually create a token. And we will pass in the ID, the name, and the username as part of our payload. So that's the first argument. We'll send the secret and the expires in. So after how much time should this token expire? After the expiration of the token, we will not be able to use that token for authentication. So we have this helper function. Now let's go back to the register function here. So now we can return token, and let's see here. So we're going to call the method that we created, create token, pass in the user. So we can safely pass in the user here now because we made sure that it is a user that it's found and the password is correct. So we can generate the token based on that user. We pass in a secret and then make this token valid for 30 minutes. So we can do 10 minutes, or it's up to you. I'd recommend that you do a test for 1 minute and then see how that works. So you're probably wondering, where does that secret come from, right? Because we need to have that secret in place in order to be able to create the token itself. So what we will do is go back to app.js, and in the very first line of app.js, and you have to make this at the top of your code, I'm going to require .env .config and then call the config method on it. This allows me to then create a .environment file, so .env, and in here I'm going to just create a new secret. Okay, and what this secret is, of course this should be a lot more complex in a production system, but for now I'm just going to keep things simple. And now I can access this particular jot_secret variable that I created as an environment variable throughout my application, because we are using this .env package. So how does that look like? Well, now I could access process. So let me just write it here. So process.env, that's the entire list of environment variables, and JWT jot_token is now one of those, so I can access that secret from that file. But of course the question still is, how do I get the secret to be part of this login resolver function, right? So how do I put it in there? So recall that we are already sharing something in this login resolver, and we learned about this already. So we have something that we share throughout the entire GraphQL Apollo server. And what is that thing? That is the models. Where do we add the models? Where we add it to the context, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to very simply add another property to this context object called that secret, and its value is going to be the environment variables in jot_secret. Perfect. So let's save this. Let's also go back to our user resolver, and now we need to bring in the secret here from the context and save this, and let's run a test. So fire up our app, go to the playground, and let's write a new mutation which should be the login. Actually, we can, if you want, you can just refresh this interface so that you get a refreshed mutation list. So there we go, that we have login, username, and I think the password for this user was test1, if I remember correctly. And this login mutation returns a token, right? So because it returns a token, we need to type in token right there. Let's run. And okay, so we have an error. User valid password is not a function. I'm pretty sure that's because the function should be called validate password. Right, so validate password is the name of the function that we defined in the user model. So that's my bad. Let's run this test again. And look at that. What we get back from this mutation is an actual token, right? So you see, this is the first part of the jot, that's the second part, and then that's the third part, all separated by dots. Okay, so let's mess up this password. Okay, so now we get password is incorrect. Let's mess up the username. We get user not found. Perfect. This works great. So in the next video, we'll take this to the next level, and we're going to add authorization to the actual GraphQL instance that we are running.